What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Sports Weekly Podcast. I'm your host, Christian Royston, joined by my co-host, Logan Shanks. And, it's been a while since we've talked about football. We're kind of deep into that basketball season. But Iowa State just released their full 2024 schedule with home matchups, where they're playing on the road. And honestly, there's a lot to talk about with just the Big 12 teams that they're playing against.
Yeah, especially because towards the end of football season, we got their opponents, you find out who they're going to be playing next year. But much like the NFL schedule, when that gets released and you got to start seeing who you're playing on what weeks, when the bye weeks are going to be for each team, it just gets even more interesting. And, this is making me even more excited for Cyclone football to come back. They did a great job on social media with these. They had guys like Bo Freeler, our guy J.R. Singleton, Rocco,
you had
Jeremiah Cooper,
Sama
all
did the
videos.
Kansas State one,
So that was pretty awesome. I had our photojournalist Tyler Coe messaged me on Instagram and said this is the best thing they've ever put out, and I would agree. It was really entertaining. But regardless, like I said, just getting really excited, especially with the home matchups that they're going to have. Regardless if we won't be covering them or not, hopefully I can make some trips back to Ames this fall and watch some of these home matchups.
Yeah, because there's quite a few pretty solid ones. Especially with obviously conference realignment, we get to see some of the new teams come to Ames. Last year, Iowa State just played them on the road, so seeing some of them in Ames will kind of be fresh for everybody. But not only that, we'll kind of see how Iowa State holds up protecting home against some of these schools that haven't played in Ames. They haven't come to Jack Trice and played against this team before.
Yeah, and it's a good it's a good mix of the new Big 12 teams coming here and some of the old rivalries. What sticks out is like having Kansas State and Texas Tech, Baylor of the old Big 12 come back here, but then also having new teams from this season like UCF and Cincinnati come here. That's going to be awesome to see that, because that was one thing that kind of irked me a little bit, was that we have these conference realignments, but Iowa State has to go to BYU and Cincinnati for both the new teams. And but like you said, just having them come here is awesome. And just it's going to be definitely a different atmosphere, and maybe some new rivalries created between UCF, a team that I couldn't even remember the last time Iowa State played them. So yeah,
and that was actually one that I was kind of interested in, just because you look at the date, it's late or middle to late October. You know how Iowa can be at that time. There is a good chance there's snow on the ground even.
Right.
You have a team from Florida come up here to play at Jack Trice. Might be an interesting game to look forward to. But you also have Cincinnati, who Iowa State went on the road and, beat them pretty soundly. You'd see them come back, right before Thanksgiving, just to see if maybe they can have their revenge game. We'll kind of see how that plays out. So it's almost like we're already forming new rivalries at this point, because you see Cincinnati twice, and you'll be seeing these new Big 12 teams quite a bit. Once Iowa State takes on Colorado at some point, you'll see some of the old Big 12 rivalries come back. So we're losing some things with obviously Texas and Oklahoma going, and no guaranteed matchups like Farmageddon, but I think it's still pretty exciting to see a lot of the new faces.
Yeah, and then in terms of like what would be like my personal favorite, or the games I'm looking forward to most for home games, I think it's going to be awesome to have Texas Tech as your homecoming game, mainly because I think Texas Tech was a Big 12 team that kind of flew under the radar this football season. I'm pretty sure they made a bowl game, and they, much like Iowa State this upcoming year, had kind of an easier Big 12 schedule. But so that is one thing also interesting to talk about too, is that I've been looking on social media, Twitter, Instagram, and a lot of people are saying that this might just be like the easiest Big 12 schedule, which is kind of lucky for Iowa State. I mean, they never really get matchups or schedules like this to where you're looking through and I don't want to be too confident, but I don't know where a loss comes outside of maybe the Iowa game.
Yeah, I'm looking through and I'm probably penciling in 3 to 4 losses at this point. There's, this is something that would happen. We expected this with Texas and Oklahoma leaving. They're kind of the two powerhouses of the conference. And at this point, you'll kind of see who takes over their spot. But, I mean, obviously it's a little early to know kind of what the teams are going to bring and what's going to happen. But we know that the Iowa game's going to be pretty competitive. Iowa State rarely wins that, unfortunately. But, there's also going to be ones like I think the Kansas game will be pretty tough because Kansas is kind of having a resurgence and pretty good. Them to be one of the better teams in the nation last year. And they still should be pretty good. So there's definitely some key matchups.
Yeah, but, a good thing for Iowa State going into games like Kansas and Utah is that Iowa State will actually have 2 bye weeks before they go up against Kansas and Utah, who are 2 of the last 4 teams they play. Personally, you look at if they don't drop the Iowa game, you probably go 3-0 in non-conference play unless like this year you drop a game to Arkansas State or North Dakota, but those 2 games will be at home. But regardless, then you go to Houston, which last year they weren't really that great, a lot, but you saw that with a lot of the new Big 12 teams like BYU, all the 4 from this year that were in the realignment didn't have they just weren't really that good, just kind of adjusting to that. But, they'll have 2 bye weeks in the first 8 weeks of the season, or 10 weeks it should be, but they'll play 8 games. You get what I'm saying. But they're going to be fresh when it comes to, the powerhouses like Kansas and Utah later in the season.
And it's important to note that they also come off the second bye week playing Texas Tech. So, they will be fresh for pretty much the back half of the schedule. Although I'm not going to really count out really any team at this point. We saw how Baylor was last year. We saw how West Virginia was last year. And obviously the new teams. And they're going to be playing pretty much the easy part of their schedule before their second bye week. So it should be interesting to see how they roll through that. Obviously there's a chance that they are 7-0 going into that second bye week.
Yeah.
Although, that is kind of unlikely. But
I mean, we're thinking about that right now, but then, we could, Iowa State could be 2-1 after non-conference play, and then, your first conference game is on the road against Houston, but you're looking at some things here that come with that second bye week. What kind of just stands out to me is the month of October. I mean, in the month of October, they have a bye week and 3 home games. Yeah. So they're, they are
or
2 home games, but for the better part of a month, they have, 3 home games, an away game, and a bye week in the span of 5 weeks. So, it's just, I think that kind of helps them out there. But then again, when you get down to, again, like teams like Kansas, Utah, even Kansas State, who's going to be looking to, get some revenge on Iowa State, who had to play them, in the snow at home, they're kind of looking to do that. To the Iowa State when they come to Ames November 30th for the last game of the season.
And I'm glad you brought that up because you talked about your favorite game possibly being that Texas Tech one. I think my favorite one coming up at home would be that Kansas State game because honestly, you can't really ask for a better way to end the season than Farmageddon, and it could be a repeat of a snow game, and we might see another repeat of a Sama snow game.
Right, and I kind of hope that Iowa State sticks to doing that. If they're going to keep doing Farmageddon, hopefully, they can make it kind of like the Iowa game where you play Kansas State the last week of the season. I'm a big fan of not only rivalries, but just rivalries that, happen around the same time. So if they can keep doing that, I think that'd be awesome because, that's just, they've kind of gone back and forth over these last, 5-10 years. So always interesting to see them match up, but overall, just a really fun schedule to look at.
Yeah. And, before we kind of move past it, I think the away games are also something that should be fun as well. I know there's one that I think everybody's probably excited for, and that's the Kansas game where they're going to be playing at Arrowhead Stadium. So that might be the most fun game that they play of the entire season. Yeah, no, that we were talking before we started recording. I would love to go to that game. I'd also love to go to our neighbors to the east in Iowa City to go there. I don't know if I've ever been to Iowa for
an Iowa State Cyhawk game, so
Been to
that
a
would be
couple.
fun to see. And I actually grew up an Iowa fan, so that never happened. But went to a couple Iowa State games. Obviously, Iowa typically won those, as you alluded to earlier. But you were mentioning also before we started recording that, while a lot of people, especially me, are counting Iowa State out for this Iowa game, last time the Cyclones were in Iowa City, they beat Iowa. And you were in attendance for that. So.
Yep, I was there covering the game, and although it wasn't the cleanest showing from either team, obviously you look at the final score, but I mean, Iowa State went in there expecting to lose. I think everybody was expecting them to lose. They were saying, maybe next year will be their year, and then they honestly have that 199-yard drive to take the lead, and it was just kind of history from there.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's definitely a fun atmosphere. I mean, any Cyhawk game is. That's the one that I think everybody has penciled on their calendar. That you kind of want to go out to that. So you look at Iowa State in the upcoming year, they really aren't losing a lot of pieces, especially on offense. They're kind of gaining players. So we could see Iowa State come in and be a really solid competitive team,
right,
as opposed to past games.
Right. And I think we've seen, because we were talking about Iowa's roster earlier, that personally, from what I know, is not really going to get better. They're going to get Cade McNamara back, and he wasn't exactly great in this year's Iowa State game. But, you talk about that offense, we kind of worried about some guys like maybe Jalen Knoll goes somewhere else, or, on the defensive side too, like Jeremiah Cooper, maybe he goes somewhere else as well. But seeing them in the promotional videos for the football schedule, I think that's kind of a reassurance, because right now we're in the spot where no one's really going to transfer anymore. If you were going to transfer, that was going to happen right when the portal opened up. So I think it's just even more promising and reassuring that, this team, like you said, is not going to change up very much. And, I think this next year's team has the ability to be better than the last 2 years. And, with Rocco just getting better every offseason, or you hope he does, I think it's very, it's still a promising future. And just looking at the schedule, like I said, it's going to be a fun year for sure.
Yeah, and going back to that Cyhawk game, I feel like in the past it's been kind of a struggle because Iowa State takes a little bit to warm up. We saw that last year with Rocco. Took them about 3 games, pretty much until the start of Big 12 play, before they actually started figuring out their offense. You saw that 2 years ago when Hunter Deckers was quarterback. It took them probably the entire season, honestly, to figure out their offense. And then, it's just been kind of that case where they kind of start slow, and that's what leads to a slow start. But, they're coming in pretty fresh. Like, they have, the same team almost from last year. So it's going to be interesting to see if they kind of roll and bring that momentum from their bowl game season into the start of this coming season.
And not just looking at the Iowa game, but with Rocco coming into his second year with this offense, I think, that's very, again, promising, because this is the first year since, Brock Purdy's senior year where it's an Iowa State quarterback going through the whole, Big 12 schedule again, or just the entire season again, because Deckers didn't play last year. So it was Beck's first year, and Deckers only had 1 year in this offense. So I think really you're just going to see a more experienced team. And, like I've said too, the schedule helps out them a lot. It helps them out a lot earlier in the year. I think it's going to be kind of weird having a bye week right after Iowa. Yeah. That was something that stuck out to me personally that I forgot to mention. Iowa State having a bye week the third week into the year, but it's definitely going to be weird.
Yeah, it should be interesting. Maybe it'll help them a little more because, they went into that Ohio game this last season and didn't look that great at all. So maybe an extra week off would help them prepare better and be there mentally, as opposed to coming straight off kind of a demoralizing loss to Iowa and then going on the road. So, having a week off after the Iowa game to be back at home versus Arkansas State should hopefully, see them finish non-con pretty well.
Right. And I guess kind of just looking at this right now, I didn't even really notice, but so since their first game is against North Dakota at home on August 31st, does that mean they'll be playing in week 0? Since they get a bye in week 3, technically?
That's what I was thinking. It does seem like they would have to start early to fit in all the games with 2 bye weeks.
Right. So, because the Iowa game, I remember, is usually played around 9/11. Like the weekend, like very close, but it's 4 days away with the Iowa game being on September 7th. So I'm thinking that we're going to be
everything a week back.
Yeah, so we're going to be seeing, Iowa State a week earlier than a lot of other teams. They could, but so they'll be one of those. There's usually a handful of teams of like Power 5 schools that play in week 0, but that was just one thing that sucked with me. I didn't even really notice that. So we're getting Iowa State football a little bit earlier here in Ames. So.
Yep. You'll just have to take a week off after that Cyhawk. Kind of recover from that game.
Yeah.
Depending on which way it goes. Maybe it's a happy recover. Maybe it's a sad one.
We'll have to see. It would be awesome to go there, but as I've told you off camera a lot of times, I just don't know if I really want to object myself to Iowa fans on the road wearing all my Iowa State gear.
I'll be honest, I've been in the stands for an Iowa game, and it's an experience. They're a devoted fan base for sure. Just a little too devoted, a little bit too much for me.
They're mean. They can be mean. I'll just say that.
Yeah.
I'll come out and say it. They can be a little mean to put it, in children's terms, but
yeah, just a little mean. We call it competitiveness.
Yeah. But in terms of the Big 12 schedule, that's kind of all I really had. Toughest game, I would probably say, is that road game against Utah and, on the road against Kansas, but I mean, they'll be both
almost
teams
a neutral site against Kansas.
Yeah, both teams, however, will be playing. It'll be a great atmosphere for them to be in. But yeah, I would probably say Utah on the road. That's got to be. I mean, and that's also something that stands out to me is probably going to be like. It won't surprise me if it's like an 8:00 kickoff too.
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, that's also one that I had high up on my toughest games of the season. But I also feel like the Kansas game might be a sneaky tough game. Although it's going to be kind of a fun atmosphere being at Arrowhead. I think Kansas is still a really good team, and they're retaining a lot of their good weapons. And honestly, they've pretty much just taken a 180 from what their program was before. So, once Leopold got to town, it's just been they've honestly looked like contenders for the top of the Big 12. So if they continue that pace, we should be in for a pretty solid game.
Right. And I'm kind of looking here just to look through as well. Like we talked about, I think it was Kansas State. That'll have a new quarterback as well. So that's probably the same situation for Kansas, Utah probably, a couple other schools like, maybe Cade McNamara doesn't come back to Iowa. I'm not sure about the other non-conference teams, but other than that.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to predict going into the season. You just don't know who's staying, who's leaving. If somebody's going to wow in the preseason and just come in there during fall camp and take the starting job. There's a lot of moving pieces. I mean, we expected some other teams to be hot last year that just weren't. We didn't see some teams that came out of the blue. I mean, you really can't predict it this early, but I think we're in for a pretty solid season.
Yeah, no, it'll be really good. Looking forward to it. Probably, I mean, with the way that this team played this year, and they're probably only going to get better, I would say probably expect them to go back to a bowl game. But I mean, I kind of thought that before the schedule got released as well.
Yeah, I think if I were to make an early prediction, I would probably say eight wins.
Yeah, and I think that's still good. I mean, you get one more year than last season, and that would be 8 wins before the bowl game as well.
Yes,
so
before the bowl game.
I could definitely see that. Maybe add or subtract one as well. Maybe you have another 7-6 season or whatever it was. So, or 7-5. But yeah, that's all I really have for Big 12 schedule.
Yep. So we can move right on into another special segment, which, it's kind of cool being from Iowa State and being able to talk about some Cyclones that are in the NFL and obviously doing really well.
Right. Pretty impactful week for Cyclones in the NFL. I mean, let's just start it right off the bat with Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant, has fully made himself relevant by getting the 49ers to the Super Bowl. Wasn't pretty in the first half. As George Kittle said, they had us in the first half. But
wasn't Purdy.
It was not Purdy. But, Brock Purdy, the 49ers defense balls out in the second half. And, I mean, I got to feel kind of bad for Detroit fans because, they get all the way there just to have a 17-point collapse. I mean,
they let up, I think, 27 unanswered points. So, not the best performance there.
But, Brock Purdy, he had that really after that interception, he kind of turned things around. And it all kind of really started with probably one of the luckiest plays I've ever seen in NFL history with Brandon Ayuk's catch.
Yeah.
Off the Lions defender. But yeah, the Iowa State will be represented in the big game by Brock Purdy, and just a great story. Videos are starting to go out about his story getting to the NFL and how he actually, apparently I didn't even notice, he pranked his parents and told them that his initial call with John Lynch, I believe, who is the manager of the Niners, that said, "We're going to draft you." He told his parents that was just another free agent call and that he wasn't going to get drafted. And that's why they all freaked out, not only because he got drafted, because they didn't think that he was going to with that last pick. So that was an interesting story. And just a bunch of videos getting released by Brock Purdy. And
put him through an emotional roller coaster there.
Yeah. But overall, I mean, it was a really fun championship weekend to watch. But I guess what was kind of your take on this past weekend?
I think Brock Purdy definitely silenced all the haters. I know everybody's saying game manager, he's system quarterback, but there were a lot of plays there at the end that he stepped up and he was making the plays not only in the air but also on the ground. I mean, if he didn't have that one long run, they probably don't come back. If he wasn't connecting on throws, they probably don't come back. And now he's been a part of two, back-to-back comebacks when honestly, Kyle Shanahan has never had a comeback in the playoffs. So just being the guy that's pushed this team to the Super Bowl. And he didn't start both games strong, obviously, but locking in when it matters, that's kind of what great quarterback's done. And I feel like he's proven himself to be a great quarterback at this point.
And if you're the Chiefs, I mean, I would still probably take the Chiefs winning this one just because I'm a big Patrick Mahomes believer. But
I think experience is going to play a big role.
Yes, but you also have to think, with the Niners and especially Brock Purdy not playing their best football, and they beat the Lions, who outplayed them for the first, 2.5 quarters probably. But Brock Purdy not playing his best game, like you said, but that means that, he could be having his best game here in the Super Bowl against the Chiefs defense, who they did a great job against Lamar last weekend. So it's going to be interesting to see how, Kyle Shanahan and Brock Purdy, Christian McCaffrey, they all go by that. But, overall, just a great story to see Brock Purdy there. And like you said, silence the haters. I think Shannon Sharp says he still needs to see Brock Purdy win the Super Bowl, but
I think Nick Wright also needs to see him win the Super Bowl. But
I don't really get that. I think he's already proven that he's probably the best quarterback that they've had since. I mean, you could say he's better than Kaepernick.
Oh yeah,
you could make
Kaepernick had a flash there for a bit, but I guess it is just 2 years in, so we'll kind of see. But so far he's kind of looking like the face of the franchise.
Yeah,
and I think I kind of want to bring up as well. 49ers come back from 2 straight comebacks to win. That's kind of what the Chiefs did when they played the 49ers in the Super Bowl, where they had to come back from 2 straight games and then came back from down against the 49ers to win that Super Bowl. So maybe we see Brock Purdy do the same thing to get his first Super Bowl.
Right.
Come back from 2 games while being down and then come back against the Chiefs this time.
And there's so much to go with like legacy around here. Does Mahomes get his third? Does, Purdy, put himself back on the mountain of, a top 10, top 5, I don't know, quarterback in this league. But overall, just, I'm really excited to see it. It sucks that it's 2 weeks away, but I get it. Be watching that game for sure. But on the other side, sadly for the Lions lost, but David Montgomery, another Cyclone, had himself a really solid game. And, unfortunately, Dan Campbell and the Lions staff, they just kind of went away from the run game that was working for them really in the first half. I mean, they had three first half rushing touchdowns. So, I mean, just kind of on the Lions side, what do you think goes into that kind of collapse, I guess?
I think you have to go away from the rush at some point. I mean, it wasn't working. You can't really expect to run all day on the 49ers. They have such a good front seven that it's not likely that that's going to work the whole time. I think they caught him off guard on a couple things. I mean, you see Jameson Williams' touchdown was kind of just fall apart on the defense, and he broke through. Really, I know a lot of people are going to call out Dan Campbell, say there were some iffy play calls, should have kicked a field goal, shouldn't have gone for it on fourth a couple times. But if you watch his games in the past, that's just kind of who he is, and it's worked for them. So I think, yeah, he could have played it safe, but I think the Lions and Dan Campbell, they wanted to make the Super Bowl playing like they were, Dan Campbell plays. So,
I'll knock Dan Campbell for going, if I'll knock the Lions and Dan Campbell for, not getting it on fourth down less than I would if he just completely switched up their identity and went for field goals on that, which, people have been looking at it, and their kicker, Badgley, not exactly the best kicker either. And those were, I think the statistics say that he's made most of his 40-plus yarders from a dome where the Lions play. Yeah. And they would have been playing outside in Santa Clara. So we don't know what happens there. Maybe he misses those field goals, and you're looking at Dan Campbell like, come on, you don't have plays drawn up for whatever it was, 4th and 3, 4th and 4.
Yeah, and I think you also look on the other side, and Dan Campbell, when going for it on 4th and 3 or 4th and less than 3, is like 90% from there. So, I mean, you play the probabilities, and your kicker is kind of iffy from that range. It makes more sense to go for it on 4th. And I know a lot of people are like, well, you should have just kicked the field goal. Field goal is not guaranteed.
Right.
So, I mean, you understand the thought process there. I mean, really, you can't coach or you can't game plan around bad plays or errors. And, I mean, we saw, I think was it Jameson Williams who fumbled? And then, not Williams, Jahmyr Gibbs who fumbled.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And then obviously you have a couple dropped catches that probably would have been touchdowns. I mean, the second half, they just kind of fell apart, and they weren't the same team as they were in the first half. And, Dan Campbell was trying to spark them at times, and it just wasn't working.
And, me personally, kind of moving off Brock Purdy here, but focusing more on the Lions, I think it really kind of sucks for them. A lot of people are looking at this like, oh, well, this is, this is a great, team, a great year to put them back on the map. This is their most successful year in probably 30 years, whatever it is, 30, 50 years. But me personally, I just don't really see the Lions getting back to this spot. I think this is really where it hits you that, I've listened to podcasts, a lot of people talk about it, where teams, I always think, oh, well, we'll be back next year. And not a lot of teams, unless your name is Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs, can get back to that same spot consistently.
Yeah, I mean, we said that about the Rams, though, when they lost to the Patriots, and that's, not too long ago. And then, you give them a few years off, they switch up some stuff, get a new quarterback, and then end up winning it. So, I mean, it's hard to tell in this league kind of what's going to happen in the future and if a team's going to sustain this. I think as long as they have Dan Campbell, though, if they get to the playoffs, honestly, that's a good year for the Lions. So.
Yeah, but overall, I'm just really excited for this Super Bowl. A lot of people are saying that this is the worst outcome, which I don't
was
really
gonna bring that up. Yeah.
I don't really agree with. I'm not going to say that this was the best outcome. I'm not even really sure what I did want, but Niners Chiefs is not the worst outcome that could have happened.
Yeah, I know a lot of people are kind of hating on, Taylor Swift being at the game. It has been really good for a while now. Has been in the Super Bowl, 2 out of the last 4 years or something. I mean, you have two teams that are pretty much always successful, and they're both in the Super Bowl. But I mean, you also have Mr. Irrelevant, a quarterback who couldn't make it to the Super Bowl last year because he got hurt, come back and make it to the Super Bowl. You have the Chiefs kind of proven everybody wrong after a down year making it to the Super Bowl. I mean, I feel like there was no bad outcome.
Right.
I would have liked to see the Lions in there because they've never been, or I would have liked to see Lamar have a shot at his first chip. But I mean, they'll have opportunities. I mean, it's really anybody's game.
Yeah, I mean, if the Lions and the Ravens would have made it to the Super Bowl, I wouldn't really know who to root for. I guess maybe the Lions just because of their story and everything. But I mean, obviously, I wanted to see my boy Brock Purdy win and go to the Super Bowl at least. And I kind of agree with you there about getting, Chiefs fatigue. I'm just a big Patrick Mahomes fan, seeing him do what he does, and credit to him for not calling out his receivers in the media during the season, because I feel like that's what a lot of other quarterbacks would do. But overall, if we real quick want to talk about that Chiefs-Ravens game, I think it was just the Ravens getting away from their identity. They had Lamar Jackson throw it close to 40 times. While he's made strides as a passer, that's just not who he is at this point.
It was just kind of another Patrick Mahomes masterclass. I mean, he started the game connecting on almost every single one of his throws. I mean, he threw the ball probably more than Lamar in that game.
I want to say, yeah,
and was connecting on more of them. I mean, it was Mahomes just being Mahomes.
Yeah.
And at some point, you can't really game plan around that, and they fell again.
Yeah, so Mahomes 30 for 39, 241 yards and a touchdown. Not the most insane game by Mahomes, but you do have to think that this Ravens defense isn't no pushover. I mean, they were the first seed, 13-4 or 13-3, I guess, heading into this game for a reason.
Yeah, the Ravens defense honestly looked pretty good. I mean, Mahomes was just able to get out of the pocket a lot, extend plays with his feet, make some pretty crazy throws, honestly. There's one in my mind where he extends the play probably 8 seconds and then tosses a wobbly ball across midfield to Kelsey with a diving catch.
And then the MVS catch to end the game as well. I mean, that was just Mahomes putting the Ravens on ice. And unfortunately for Lamar, end zone, which a lot of people would say pass interference, but also that's just a bad throw in general. And then, my mom would get a kick out of this one, but we were watching the game together and saw Zay Flowers get the taunting penalty. And then the next two plays are, it looked like maybe a screen pass set up for him, and the ball got thrown at his back. So he just didn't even know that the pass was coming to him. And then the next play, he fumbles into the end zone. And my mom said, well, that's just karma. And I was like, well, that's kind of not really football talk, but I mean, that's just
I guess it is karma.
Kind of a boneheaded play by Zay Flowers. And it sucks because, again, I think the Ravens are another team where I just don't know I just don't really have confidence in them if they do get back to this spot, if they can pull it off. And I don't think it's just Lamar. I think it's just the rest of the team in general.
Yeah. And I mean, this was a game that was decided by one touchdown, of course. And I mean, it really felt like the Chiefs were up by way more throughout the entire game. But at the end of the day, it was a one-possession game the entire way through. And so those little errors mattered. So, you have Lamar throw that pick instead of scoring on that drive. You have Zay Flowers fumbling it. You have really impactful plays that, just kind of cost them the game in what turned out to be almost a perfect game from both sides. Like, as perfect error-wise as it could be.
And I will say, we were heading into this season, we were talking about, you know, guys like Odell Beckham Jr. I thought Odell was going to have a breakout season and come back into the league. I don't know if you remember talking about that with me. I said, for sure, gets over 1,000 yards. For sure. No. That did not happen.
As a Browns fan, have watched Odell currently and have not been impressed with them since his Giants days. So is what it is.
Finished with 565 yards.
Yeah.
3 touchdowns.
But anyways, going back to Cyclones, obviously, we'll be seeing a pretty solid matchup. We'll see the current playing GOAT, active GOAT versus Iowa State's GOAT.
Yep.
Kind of see who comes out on top there if Brock Purdy can continue this winning mentality that he has. I mean, he really has only lost 3 games as playing all the way through. So
I'm definitely very excited. Like I said, I think it's still a Chiefs win, but, you know, if Brock Purdy can pull it out and, you know, probably I would say upset Mahomes, I want to say that actually the Niners might be the one favored. I want to check that real quick, but
I could see that with how complete the team is, and obviously them coming in as the number 1 seed, expected to make the Super Bowl the entire year. You would expect that they would be the team that comes out favored.
Niners favored by 2, which is kind of weird, but interesting. I probably will be taking Chiefs on that. And if I over under 47.5 points, I'm gonna say over.
I could see that.
The over.
Yeah.
Who do you think's win the Pro Bowl? I'm just kidding.
Yeah, give me the AFC by far.
Baker Mayfield now back, by the way, because Dak Prescott's not attending.
Oh,
so
well, more good news for Logan and his Baker Mayfield crush.
Anyways, thanks for joining us on this episode of, you know, Sports Weekly, our hiatus talking about the Big 12 schedule and Brock Purdy going to the Super Bowl. So we will see you guys next time.